Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank everyone for your registering and attending of our webinar on hybrid rye production tips. The objective of this webinar is to share production tips and agronomic information with the current growers of hybrid fall rye. My name is Gordon Geisam, the South Saskatchewan Southeast Alberta Territory Manager for FP Genetics. I will be your moderator for this event. The webinar should take about 40 minutes. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for answers to your questions. You should see on your screen the question button that will allow you to type in your questions. Feel free to send us questions at any time, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Before I introduce our presenters, I just wanted to say a few words about FP Genetics. FP Genetics is dedicated to providing superior seed genetics to Western Canadian farmers through 155 seedsmen that actually own the company. FP Genetics will license leading genetics from breeding companies around the globe for farmers who want the most profitable seed varieties. In 2013, FP Genetics partnered with KWS out of Germany to access the first viable hybrid rye registered in Canada, which includes the Braceto and Bono products and the newly registered Gitano. KWS is the fourth largest seed company in the world. Now I would like to introduce you to our presenters. Our first presenter is Denise Schmidt from FP Genetics, who is the National Sales Manager. Our second presenter will be Jonathan Hall, who is a commodity trader with Schooler Grain. I will now turn things over to Denise to give her presentation on production tips.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Gordon, very much for having us here today, and thank you so much for taking the time to moderate. Thank you, everybody, as attendees. Thank you for registering and taking time out of your spring session. I know it's a really busy time of year, and we really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to spend some time to kind of go through a little bit about production tips, on the hybrid rye. You have to excuse me this morning. I am fighting a bit of a cold. Hopefully I don't get too raspy for you, but we'll do my best to keep it nice and clear for you. If you have any challenges in hearing me, please feel free to just send out a note on your question button there, and our staff in the Regina office will make sure that we correct any audio problems that we have. So to start things off today, I just wanted to throw up and give you a little bit of outline what I wanted to talk about today. When we are looking at things today, there's about 8 things that I want to go through. Want to talk about the objectives in the market, what we're looking at with the hybrid rye, recap a little bit about seeding practices, talk a little bit about overall fertility, and also talk a little bit about winter survivability, and of course the big question that we have right now, the spring vigor. And then we'll go through some really of the tips that we want to get into, and we talk about the pest control, harvest management, and we will touch a little bit on just a couple of the new hybrids that we have in the market right now, and then one that we've got coming up in the near future, so that we're really excited about. So let's start things off. I just, as Gordon mentioned, we have been working with KWS since about 2013. I've been very fortunate to be involved since the very beginning in bringing these exciting new varieties to the market. One of the things, that we are trying to do, and that is a little different when we are bringing products to the market, is trying to create that stable market and make it very attractive to dedicated producers. This is not a market that we're looking at and going out to all of Western Canada and all of Eastern Canada and getting every grower out there to grow this product. We're really trying to capture production acres and capture the potentials out there and work with a number of end users to make sure that we are getting the market that we're after. You can see from the screen there that we are trying to capture about 300,000 tons per year. That is the goal as we go forward. A lot of this market that we are looking at is already in the U.S. There's some in Canada already. We are looking at a lot of these varieties have been in the German and Europe countries before. And we are looking at bringing and replacing some of that here in Canada and really creating that market and to be able to have it go into the U.S. market and locally to be able to provide that. The potential that we are looking at about 150,000 acres of production in Western Canada. Last year we were in the ballpark of about 25 to 30,000 acres across Canada. So we've got a long way to go yet, but we are growing very rapidly, and we are starting to see that expand quite quickly. So that's one of the reasons for doing some of these webinars that we do, is just working with producers, trying to make sure that we are giving them the best advantage that we can when we are looking at bringing these hybrids into the market. So let's move right now into the agronomic part, and not going to spend a whole lot of time about seed information. Obviously we are into spring, so everybody's gone through this part already, but just a couple of notes that I did want to make, because we do get lots of questions about where the increased yield comes from and why we're targeting the seeding rates that we are targeting. As everyone's familiar with, we are selling it by the unit. It is 0.8 of the units per acre that we're targeting, and we are targeting that about 18 plants per meter squared. So, sorry, are we having any audio problems? I just had a little bit of a glitch there. Hopefully everyone can still hear me. I'll slow down a little bit, maybe that our audio is having trouble keeping up. So I was just saying about seeding rates. What we are looking at is that 0.8, and the reason for that is because what we're trying to create really is allowing the hybrid to do the tillering that it needs to do. We are looking at the biggest thing about the hybrids is that yield increase does come from the heterosis. So that's the heterosis between the parent lines, the distinct parent lines that are out there, those offsprings that come from those parent lines. They exhibit the traits, and they exhibit the traits of this amazing amount of tillering that is going on. And that's really where the extra yield comes from. So, that is what we are looking at. That's why we're trying to say, what, this isn't like a winter cereal, a winter wheat crop that you want to have up in those 30 plants. We do want to keep it down in those 18 so that we can do some great things and let it tiller and let that yield for potential form. This is a little slide that we've done a bit of work with Indian Head Research Organization. They did some tests for us and some work with the government as well for fall ride response to seeding rates. Because we get the questions so much about, should we increase the seeding rate? Should we do more? Should we have more plants? We're trying to really find that optimal seeding rate and amount of plants out there. And you can see from the graph ahead, sorry, pardon me, in front of you, that we are finding that, trying to find that nice sweet spot in that the amount of tillers that are there and the amount of plants that are there, and we are finding that just around that, below that 1 unit is where we are finding the tillering to be at its maximum, and finding that it does get good production for us. You can see then that correlates to this slide, which, that means more yield. That's the great part about the tillering on this, that we're finding that nice sweet spot that you can see that the hybrid here, when we get it just under that unit per acre, that we are seeing that we do get the bushels per acre return that we're looking for. As soon as we start pushing it over that bushel, that unit per acre, we do not see the incremental bushel increase. So, that's really what we're looking at. Is we get lots of questions, well, if I push my seeding rate up, I should get extra bushels out of it. But we're just not finding that under ideal conditions. When we do get the seeding dates correct, when we do get it in the fields in the fall when we need to, that we really are finding that optimal as we go forward with that unit that we are recommending. Pardon me. Let's talk a little bit about fall fertility. Obviously, everyone's gone through the fall. We've given it hopefully a good start. The reason that I just wanted to touch on it briefly today was just to remind yourselves that we are targeting yields in that anywhere from 100 to 120 bushels an acre, and also that for fall rye, in general, it is about 15% more efficient at utilizing fertility than just a regular cereal winter wheat crop. So that's something you want to think about. Obviously, in the fall, we've, everyone's gone through and done their safe applications. We've put it in where we needed to put it in. But wanted to just remind you of what your total targets are as we're going forward. We wanted to make sure that you are looking at the full package and that you are remembering of the increased efficiency as we go forward. So one thing we get questions about quite often is, ESN, different products, delayed products that are out there, does that work for us? Can we use it in the fall? The work that we have done with it, some of our growers that have used them before, we are not seeing any benefits. One of the things, that we try to use those delayed products for in other cereals is really to add protein. It gives you that late end and it gives you that push late in the season, where with a rye crop, you are not looking at wanting to have that as we go forward. You want to make sure that we're targeting yield, and we'll talk about that a little later on, that we want to make sure that that's what we're looking at, and we're not trying to target the prolonged growth or the nitrogen use later in the season. Okay, so that's just something to think about. Excuse me. So winter survivability, I mean, everyone's had a look probably already, and we'll talk about spring vigor as we go forward, but one of the things that I wanted to mention was when you have it going into your dormancy, when you have it coming out of fall season, you want to at least have one tiller. I mean, that is the optimal that we have it going for. That's why we are looking at a seeding date that is very similar to winter cereals, anywhere from mid-August to mid-September. Those are the prime targets that we were recommending to you all this fall. And that's really the reason for that, is to get your development up and out of the ground. We want it to get to that tillering stage, and we want to give it the best chance we have for survival as we go forward. So let's talk about what's on everybody's minds, and it's kind of why I went through the first 3-4 things quicker, because we are in spring today. As everyone, we've had, lots of phone calls, lots of discussion out there. I've walked a number of fields already, and everyone's trying to get a handle on, what's it looking like this year? What do I need to do, and how do I find that out? Well, the best information I can tell you is that it's the same fundamentals as any winter cereal crop, same as winter wheat. You want to get out in the field. The drive-by doesn't totally work. Green leaves does not necessarily mean winter survival. You want to go out, dig up some plants, have a look, see if there's any new white roots there. Eventually you'll get the root hairs, but if we're starting to get the tips, the nice little white tips of the roots, that means we have success, and that also means that this is going to, the plant's going to do very well, and it is coming out of dormancy. The one thing that we can stress, and we always get lots of phone calls in early April saying, I think it's greening up, not sure. We have to wait for the soil to get to about 0 degrees. It does need to warm up. It seems like spring is nice and warm, and we've got lots of growing degree days, but overall in general, growth doesn't occur until we get the adequate amount of growing degrees. So it does take some time. It does take the soil time to warm up, and then you will start getting the white roots. Recommend that all of you at this point, right this week, and should be out there, should be digging up a few plants. If you have any questions about it, feel free. I'll give you contact information later. You can send us pictures. We will come out and talk to you. But you should by now starting to see some of those white roots in most areas, depending on if all the snow is gone and the temperature is warmed up adequately in the soil. One thing I can tell you is that once it does take off, it will aggressively tiller. It is a plant, and I'll show you some pictures that it will aggressively tiller. It will fill in the soil. But what I can say is be patient. And in this time of year, I always tell guys, have a look at it, then go to the lake for about a week, because it is one that it takes time for the ground to warm up, and as soon as the ground warms up, it will do great things for you. But just be patient. Excuse me. This is a picture that we have just to kind of show you what about mid-May looks like and what good stubble and good winter survival will look like. On the right-hand side of your screen, you do see winter wheat. This was done just outside of Regina at Riceston a couple years ago, and the Brisetto is on the left-hand side of the screen. You can see this was the 14th of May, how much more advanced the rye does get compared to a winter wheat crop. So it is something that once it does start to take off, it does start to tiller, you will see that it closes in the ground, and it does become very competitive against weeds out there, and it does take advantage of the early spring moisture. It just does take time as soon as that soil is warmed up. We need to get those soil temperatures warmed up. This is a slide example for you, just the difference between winter wheat and Brisetto, the hybrid rye. It does tiller, and you can see the differences in the tillering. This was taken out of the ground early on in spring. This is out of eastern Canada, where we do have production in the ground with some of our growers. And you can see just the difference in how quickly it tills and starts to cover the ground. So I just wanted to provide you that visual so that you can have an idea of what it should start to look like as soon as the ground does warm up. Excuse me. Let's talk a little bit about spring fertility. This, of course, I am sure with all of you on the line is top of mind at this point, trying to understand what you should do, when you should do it, how long we should take to make decisions. What I can tell you, there is differences between winter wheat and the rye. And the biggest thing that we can tell you right now is that you need to be making the decisions for doing your top dressing and doing your spring fertility requirements and getting out there as soon as is feasible. As soon as that ground is warmed up, as soon as the ground is dry enough to support equipment, that's when you want to be going out and getting your fertility on and getting the program, you know, the last bit of your nutrients there. What we're trying to do, and I will show you in a couple slides, is just we aren't targeting protein, we're targeting yield. And yield is formed earlier on in hybrid rye compared to winter wheat. So we are not waiting until late May and June time period when we normally would do top dressing in a winter cereal and a winter wheat crop. We are wanting to try and get that on much earlier in a rye crop. We don't want to have extra protein. We're not targeting for extra protein. We are targeting yield, and we don't want to be too late with that. We have done some work as far as fertility and doing tests, and we're doing tests with anywhere from that 90 to 120 pounds. We are finding, depending on your soil type, depending on your soil tests and residuals that you do have available, those are kind of the ideal rates that we are seeing. I get lots of questions about whether, you know, we're getting such high yield. Should we push fertility up past that 120? What we are finding is that's not necessary, and that goes back to that it is, as I mentioned before, just that much more efficient. It's about 15% more efficient in utilization of fertility. So you aren't having to put that extra there to try and capture that other yield. It uses it more efficient. So we are staying in that time period, or in that targeting zone of somewhere between that 90 to 120 pounds as we go forward. The biggest takeaway here in spring fertility is as soon as you can get out there, make your assessments, as soon as you can get the equipment out there, that's when we want to be targeting to do our top dressing. We don't want to be waiting later on, and you will have much more success if you can get that nitrogen on the ground earlier than if you do later. Your yield potentials will be just that much higher. Excuse me. This is an example just to show you a couple years ago, taken in Bertle, Manitoba, just inside the west side of the border. You can see here we've got the same field, same situation. Tried to take exactly the same spot in the field to just show you the difference between what the crop looks like May 12th, May 22nd, and then into June. You can notice the big difference that most of the time with the winter cereal, we would wait until we get nice green growth like in the June and that high amount of growth to do top dressing. But that is way too late for the hybrid. We want to be getting it on ideally somewhere in the middle of those first two pictures so that we can get out there and get that on the ground as soon as we can, and it will start using that fertility to form yield. This is a slide I was referring to, and this is probably one of my favorite slides overall for trying to explain the difference and what your difference is between winter wheat and a rye plant. I mean, everyone, if we look at the cursor on the screen here, the very first plant is a wheat plant. We are seeing that normally the yield, this is this yellow bar right here with leaf, it shows that yield is coming out from the leaf, the flag leaf stage here in wheat. Little bit of yield forming from the grain, which is the stalk in traditional wheat. And then if you look over to the rye plant, this is the biggest difference. Most of the yield formation and the yield potential is from the stalk. So this is why it is so important to make sure that you are getting that fertility on early. The yield formation does come from the majority of the stalk growth and not from the leaf growth. So that is very different than what we're used to in a winter wheat crop. That is why one of the things as well when we talk about as we go forward, about pests, about disease control, things like that. We have to think about that the majority of yield formation is done very early on in a rye plant compared to a wheat plant. So that is a total different mindset than we are used to dealing with agronomically compared to a winter wheat crop that we have traditionally had most of our growers grow that are now growing a hybrid rye crop. So that's a big aha moment. And if you can take away anything from this presentation, I encourage you to think about that as you go forward and really think about how that is different compared to a winter cereal crop and the things that you can do in your practices to make sure that you're utilizing everything you can to give the rye that extra yield potential early on and not so concerned about later on when we're trying to have yield formation. If we talk about pest control, we talk a little bit about herbicides and diseases and Fusarium. We will touch on all of those very briefly. One of the challenges that we do have with hybrid rye is there are very few products that are actually on label for rye in general. The hybrid is a rye plant, so anything that is labeled for rye in general is labeled for hybrid rye. It is no different other than the heterosis and other than the parents that are in it when we look at the genetics of it. So it is still agronomically a rye plant. You will find, as we mentioned earlier on, that competition for weeds, there isn't a lot of need sometimes to do any kind of in-crop application. Achieve is really the only registered product out there for wild oat control. That seems to usually be most of the concerns that folks have out there. Broadleaf, there's less restriction to it. 2,4-Ds, ester, things like that, they are registered, so those are some options. But we have found over the last few years, we have a number of growers that have not had to do any in-crop application. We recommend that really go out, either scout the fields yourself or consult your local agronomist and have a look at what is out there, put together the best options for you of what is registered. And you may find, depending on if you're not having a lot of competition, which we've seen in the past few years, that you will not have to worry about doing an in-crop application. But definitely recommend just go out and scout it, have a look, see how things are. Excuse me. When we talk about diseases, we'll talk about Fusarium, but just to talk about, main concerns as far as you already asked about rust and flag leaf and all that kind of diseases that most of the time we're so concerned about in our cereal crops and in our winter wheat crops. As you saw from the pre-slide that we had before, we aren't trying to protect that flag leaf like we are in a winter cereal crop. So the rye, we just aren't as concerned because it doesn't get as much yield formation. And also just the window that we have. The rye does, once it does get growing, tillers very quickly, does get ahead of the game, and you will find is earlier than your winter wheat crop. So we do not usually have the disease problems on the flag leaf like we have seen in other crops. Right now there is no registered products for that. Recommend just talk to your agronomist out there. If you are seeing major concerns, give us a call. There has been a few people do some things, but we're not recommending anything at this point, and we haven't seen any real need to have to worry about the flag leaf diseases and the leaf diseases in the rye up to this point, which is great news. Less dollars for you as producers to have to worry about as we're going forward. Excuse me. One of the things that we are doing is, as FP Genetics, we're doing lots of studies. We're working with a number of local agronomists out there just to try some different products. We are working with a number of chemistry companies at this point to get some products registered. So we are looking at all the options that are out there to make sure that as we do go forward, if there is disease or pests that we need to worry about, that we are getting options for you as growers as we do go forward. So let's talk about Fusarium. That's a big one. Probably the second most questions that we get with the hybrid rye is what does it look like for Fusarium? What do we need to be worried about? When should we be scouting? All those wonderful things, of course, that we worry about when it comes to Fusarium and all our other crops are out there. The great news with hybrid rye is in the last few years we've done fairly well as far as Fusarium in it. Part of that is the reason, and I'll show you some pictures as we go forward, is just how uniform the hybrid is. What that does give us, it gives us the option that the flowering and the timing of the flowering is also uniform compared to the open pollinated that are out there. Everyone's very used to the open pollinated and how tall they are, how ragged looking they are, and they do flower and mature very different and all timing all over the place. But the great part about the hybrid rye is that it is very uniform, very tabletop, and it does shorten up and really create a uniform flowering time compared to an open pollinated rye crop. You do find that, you know, early seeding date in a good stubble is the best way to make that uniform flowering. That's why we're working with all of you at the very beginning to try and make sure we're ahead of the game and get it into the ground as early as we can. What I can tell you though is, excuse me, as a guideline is that rye flowers very much later than traditional wheat does. It flowers after heading time period and about a week to 10 days. So that's a big takeaway for you, that compared to wheat, we are looking at a week to 10 days after it heads when we start to get anthesis occurring. So it's a lot later. You need to be scouting later than you're used to scouting in a winter wheat crop. It's something to consider, something to think about. It is, you know, then also does create the challenge for trying to say, should we spray or should we not spray for Fusarium control? We have had a few guys off-label do some applications and have been successful, but we aren't in the last few years recommending that you have to do it because we have been out of that window. And we also, the timing becomes very difficult to scout for because it is so long and it is after the heading time period. So just some things to think about. It is information that we are providing to all the majority of agronomists out there to make sure that they have that information as well so that they're able to assist any of the growers out there when they are looking at anthesis and when that time period is occurring. Sorry, there we go, little delay. Here is just the example of the uniformity and how we can create an atmosphere for less disease and an environment for less disease. You see Brisetto, which is our first hybrid that became available on the market on your right-hand side of the screen, and this is Hazlitt that we did a comparison of. You can see in the background here, this is where actually some of it is in the background. Much, much taller than the Brisetto and much less uniform. When you're looking at it, you can see on the screen all these wonderful heads that are in there. That makes it very difficult for maturity, for timing, for uniformity of the crop. Where the Brisetto and the hybrid rye crops are really like a tall winter wheat crop. You're really looking at about a 36-inch tall crop, and they are very, very uniform and tabletop on top. So very, you'd look and say that's kind of like a winter wheat on steroids is my comparison. That we just have a little bit taller than winter wheat, but you look at difference of just heads and everyone would think it is a winter wheat crop because it is so uniform and they're not used to seeing that in a hybrid rye crop, or pardon me, in a open pollinated crop. One of the other diseases that does come up with questions quite a bit is ergot. Rye is susceptible to ergot. It is a rye. There's traditional rye plant when we come to susceptibility to ergot. So it is more susceptible than a wheat crop, and you will find that that is the case. We don't recommend doing it close rotations of cereals because that can create some challenges. Ergot bodies that come out of the grasses will survive over winter, and then that becomes the available bodies that when it rains, it produces spores and they get released off, and when it rains, then those come up into the environment and then do come up into the rye plant. So we do recommend, thinking about long term, and this is why a number of your growers out there last year, we talked to you about where are you growing this, and actually for growers that we're already looking at coming up in the fall of 2017, thinking about where they're putting it and where they're trying to manage that for, and we recommend that you look at that now and start thinking about that. Mowing is the best way to manage ergot. We do get lots of questions about copper and other options out there that have been on the market to say, believe that that will reduce ergot. We haven't done any tests with those on the market. You know, if it's something that you have had experience with on your production practices and you believe it works, then I would say, you know, talk to local agronomists, talk to ourselves, and let's determine if it is something in your productions that you think might help. But at this point, it really is the spores that overwinter and then become a problem when we start to get early June rains and we start to get that germination of spores and higher infection rates because there was grasses there the year before. So really, you know, control the grasses, think about future years, and you shouldn't have as many problems as you would if you would put it right next to some grasses that are out there. Excuse me. Let's move on to harvest management. So we've gone through the spring, we've got a great looking crop, we've done what we need to do production-wise to give it its best options and really create that yield formation. Now we're getting close to getting it to harvest. And one of the great things about, as you saw from the one picture, and I'll show you a couple more pictures, is that the real benefit, one of the real benefits of the hybrid rye and it not being so tall and it being stronger is that we don't get as much lodging as conventional rye. That is one of the big advantages to it, that it does create great opportunities for harvest. You know, it does have great standability, and even though it is taller than comparative to a regular winter wheat crop, it doesn't have the potential to lodge like a traditional open pollinated does. What we are recommending is to straight cut. We have a number of growers out there in the last couple of years that have gone through and straight cut with no problems whatsoever. Would like to just mention that desiccation isn't, it's not registered right now. Make sure that if you are even thinking about going to that option of doing some desiccation, that you talk to your contractors, whoever you have contract your grain with, because depending on the market they can have, if there is any residue on that grain, you can get rejected. So we just want to be fully aware of that, but making sure that you're making those decisions and you've had those discussions before you go in and do any type of desiccation that is off-label. We can tell you that in the last couple of years, we've had great success actually encouraging producers to harvest it slightly tough. If you look at going in there and taking it off in about that 14.5% to 15%, and then drying things down, you can preserve the kernel integrity, you can get great quality, and you can get very consistent falling numbers. It is something that, you know, when everyone's making the decisions to grow hybrid rye, it's one of the big benefits that we have is that it has a consistent falling number. So we want to really help producers try and get that falling number as consistent and as high as we can and optimal as we can. And we are seeing that if you do a little bit of harvest when it is slightly tough, that is helping. And it is helping you get off exceptional quality as you move into the harvest season. And one of the things that a person needs to be aware of when we are talking about a rye crop and a rye plant in general is that the seed germ is more exposed than in a wheat. So when you are thrashing out the rye, you need to be aware of that, you need to slow some cylinders down. We have seen that in the last couple of years, in that little bit of slowing the cylinders down, just not quite as tough and as rough on the seed, and you will get much better quality out of it than you would when you are doing a winter cereal, keeping that speed up. So rye just it does have a little bit more exposed germ, and you should be aware of that, and that a little bit taking it off tough helps protect that germ as well. We just want to be aware that we don't want to push. You know, we've had lots of guys that say, okay, well then I'll take it off at 18% and I'll dry it all the way down. There can be concerns with falling number and concerns with quality that, you know, the integrity of the seeds, quality then becomes an issue because you're taking it off so moist. We really trying to find that nice sweet spot in about that 14.5% to 15% moisture level when you are working with the hybrid rye. This is just a visual for you, some of the same work that we have done in Indian Head that they did for us, and pleasure to work with them and on a number of the things that we've done when we looked at feeding rates. They also looked at lodging and what lodging is doing and how much lodging there is compared to the Hazlitt, which is the open pollinated variety that everyone is familiar out there with. We are seeing that in that nice, you know, why we are recommending that 0.8 of the Indian feeding rate, we are seeing significantly less lodging and keeping it in those ranges of seeding give us the optimal compared to way up on the chart when you're looking at the open pollinated and the amount of lodging that does occur. So great opportunity with the hybrids to have a great harvest season when it comes to no lodging. This is a visual for you. This is the same area in Bertle that we did some work with different seeding rates, and the open pollinated Hazlitt on the right-hand side of the screen is right adjacent to the Bursetto, just off to the side of it, 100 meters. And this is what it looked like. It does at the same time of maturity. You can see it's starting to tips are starting to ripen off and down in the canopy. So just before harvest, the Hazlitt does start to lay over and does start to get nice and twisted, just that extra height to it. And the non-uniform does cause that to create some lodging, where Bursetto, no lodging, great uniformity, and becomes very easy to harvest as we go forward. So I just wanted to touch on a number of those things when we were looking at production. We're looking at spring fertility all the way through to harvest, and that those are some of the basic things that we want to make sure that yourself as producers are looking at, thinking about, making sure if there's other questions that you have for us along those lines, that you are reaching out and asking us the questions so we can share that information. As they are new crops out there, there's some fantastic yield potentials for the hybrids. It's an exciting new crop that I've been fortunate to be part of to bring to the market. And we have learned a lot in the last couple of years, and it does create some great opportunity for producers, and we look forward in the future. It will bring a lot more opportunities as well. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about new hybrids on the market. Right now we have, as Gordon mentioned earlier on, we have Bursetto and Bono that was brought to the market last year. Bono is 10% higher yielding than Bursetto, so we have a number of acres out there of Bono in the ground this year. I'm excited to see how those turn out this year. What we've seen in the last couple of years bringing it through registration has done exceptionally well. But we're also excited to say that we have a new hybrid that's going to become available this fall. It's going to be limited acres this fall, some comparisons being done, and then we'll be full production the year after that. Gitano received interim registration, and the exciting part of it is that it has a pollen plus gene in it, which does create some ergot resistance in the variety. It has been available in Germany the last number of years, and it is the most ergot-resistant variety there. So that is why we are very excited to be working with KWS to bring it over to Canada and try it here with producers and really look at how much ergot control we can get. It's exciting coming out of registration trials. We are seeing some significant reductions, and we are seeing some great yields just like the Bursetto. So it's a great new variety that I'm looking forward to in the next couple of years as we fully bring it to market to be able to share and grow with some of you growers out there in the future. So that's all I had for today. As Gordon mentioned earlier in the presentation at the start of it, please feel free, and I hope you've been sending in your questions. That's what we're here for today, is to give you some general outlines and then open the floors to be able to send in your questions. We'll answer as many as we can today. And if we can't get them to all of them, we will put up our contact information. You can feel free to contact us directly and we'll answer any questions from you that we can. And if we don't have the answers right away, we will definitely find those answers for you.